Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome to lesson 7.5 of Everyday Math. Today's objective is to be able to represent fractions on a number line. On the first slide, you'll see today's math message. Try to name a fraction between 0 and 1. Pause this video to give yourself time to think as needed. As a reminder, anything less than a whole is less than 1. Here are the fraction bars and fraction circle tools that you are used to using. I put X's on both of the red wholes because a whole is not less than 1 because it's equivalent to 1. I also put X's on this last piece of every fraction bar and one slice of every fraction circle. Again, 2 halves or 3/3 or 4/4, these are all also equivalent to 1. As you can see, they line up with the whole. If I were to cover the fraction circle whole using 4/4, I would cover the entire whole. That would make 4/4 equivalent to 1. So, fractions that are less than 1 would be anything that's not covered. 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5. Basically, all of your unit fractions. But also 2/3, 2/4, 3/4. Just from looking at the fraction bars that are not covered in X's, there are a lot of fractions that are less than 1 whole. Now we're back at our number line. We have 0 and 1. Where do you think 1/2 would go on the number line? Again, if you're not sure, we can look at the fraction bars. 1/2 is exactly halfway between the beginning and the end of the whole, or between 0 and 1. Just going to slide that over. Where would 1/4 go? Well, 1/4 is smaller than 1/2. In fact, it's halfway as big. So I'm going to slide this on here, and then I'm going to show you the fraction bars. Here's 1/2, here's 1/4. 1/4, 2/4 are equivalent to 1/2. So 1/4 would go halfway in between. Let's try to plot some other fractions that you might have named between 0 and 1. Let's start with 3/4. Is 3/4 closer to 0, or is 3/4 closer to 1 whole? Point to your screen where you think this fraction should go on your number line. 3/4 is closer to 1, so it should be on the in between 1/2 and the whole. What about 1/3? Is 1/3 closer to 0 or closer to 1? Point to your screen with where you think this fraction should go on the number line. 1/3 is closer to 0, but it's also a little bit larger than 1/4, so I'm going to put it about there. Today we are going to focus on 2 vocabulary words. First, distance. Distance means to think about fractions as the distance from 0 to an endpoint on the number line. You'll notice distance from 0 is boxed in red. That's because this language is very important when describing where a fraction or an endpoint is. Here is the fraction bar for fourths. You can see 3/4 are colored in on the fraction bar. On the number line, you can see that the triangle has moved to the 3/4 spot. This triangle is 3/4 away from 0 on the number line. Our other word today is whole. A whole is the distance from 0 to 1 on a number line. As you can see, now the fourths fraction bars are completely colored in. So we have 4/4. And on the number line, the triangle has moved to the 1 or to 4/4. Anytime you see the numerator and denominator as the same number, that represents one whole. Or if you just see the number 1, that also represents one whole. The next few slides, we're going to be looking at Math Journal page 229 and using fraction bars. If you are able to use the digital version, you can go ahead and proceed to the next slides. However, if you are not able to use the digital version or wish to use a printable paper version instead, please click here. If you have clicked here, you will see that there are fraction bar pieces that are in color that you can print and cut out. They align and match perfectly with the Math Journal page that we are going to be working on. You would also need to print this out. Pause the video if you need some time to do this and prepare your resources. Let's get started. We're going to use our fraction strips that are here on the side. We're going to use the 1/2 pieces first. Place the half strips on the halves number line. You'll see it says whole, halves. So I'm going to place the 1/2 pieces on the halves number line. Then I would like you to take a tick mark and I want you to drag it where the fraction bars end. So I have one tick mark for 0 on the number line already, one tick mark for where the 1/2 bar ends, and there's actually another tick mark under here, but if it makes you smile, you can add another tick mark where that fraction bar ends as well. Let's repeat the process using fourths. Here's the fourths number line and the fourths fraction bar pieces. Drag the fourths fraction bars to the fourths number line. At the end of each fourth, you're going to need to add a tick mark to your number line. Again, if you're doing this on paper, that's totally okay too. It works the same way. Okay. The next thing you're going to do is actually take the triangle and you're going to place it at 0 on each number line. We are going to be hopping from one tick mark to the next on our screens or on our papers. Count out each tick mark. For example, this is 0/2, this is 1/2, this is 2/2, which are equal to one whole. You're going to label each of these tick marks, but I'll show you that in a second. First, let's use our triangle to try the fourths. Again, I'm starting on 0. 0/4, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, or one whole. Please move your triangle and try to count them again on your own. Pause this video to give yourself time. I'm now going to take my fraction bars off of my number line so that I can show you how to write the fractions. You're going to need to insert a text box. To insert a text box, you're going to go up to where it says Insert and click the words Text Box. If you click on your screen, it will make a big text bar for you. Because we're really only writing fractions, I'm going to shrink this text box to be much smaller. When we put our triangle here, we said this was 0/2. Double click in here, 0, use the slash, halves, 2. If you want to make it a little bigger so it's on the same line, that's completely okay. Or you can leave it as it was. Okay? Then you're going to drag this over to your number line. You can actually right-click, copy, and paste to get a new text box, or repeat the process by insert text box. This is a part that's much easier if you're doing it on paper, but please be patient if you're doing it digitally. So this was 0/2, and this was 1/2. So I need to move my 0 and change it to a 1. Take some time to finish labeling the rest of the halves and fourths number lines. Great job! Now your number line should look something like this. 0/2, 1/2, 2/2, again equal to 1. 0/4, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, again equal to 1. Now I'd like you to continue to use the fraction strips and repeat the process using the eighths, thirds, and sixths number lines. Please also make sure that you place your tick marks, practice counting using your triangle, and label the fractions on the number line like you did before. Pause this video to give yourself time, otherwise we'll be moving on to the next activity. Now let's look at equivalent fractions on the number lines. Again, if you want, you can print a copy of this chart by clicking here. This will give you a version that you can print out on your own. If you do print this out, you will need a ruler, a pencil, or another straight edge objects to be your line to help find the equivalent fractions. To compare fractions, the whole must be the same. So the first thing we're going to do is move the red line to mark where one whole is. If you look at our first number line, this one is a little different than the one we were looking at before. Our number line before went from 0 to 1, but our new number line goes from 0 to 2. So to mark where one whole is, we need to find the 1, and we're going to drag our red line to the 1 on the number line. This is where one whole is marked on all of the number lines below. As you can see, I have 1, 1/1. If you need to move it a little bit to be able to read them, that's perfectly okay. 2/2, 3/3, 4/4, 6/6, and 8/8. All of these fractions are equivalent to one whole. Now let's try a different fraction. We're going to use the red line to find fractions that are equivalent to 1/2. I'm going to go to the halves number line. Here's 1/2, and move my red line to where 1/2 is. Now we want to see which other fractions are the same distance from 0 as 1/2. Again, this would be any fraction that completely is covered by our red line because they're all the same distance from 0. If I go to my thirds number line, my red line is in between 1/3 and 2/3. That tells me that no thirds fraction is equivalent to 1/2. Let's look at our fourths number line. I have 1/4, 2/4. 2/4 is in line with our 1/2. That means 2/4 is equivalent to 1/2 because again, it's the same distance from 0 on the number line. Can you find another fraction that is equivalent to 1/2 using the red line? Point to it on your number line or your screen. Great